You're listening to 88.7 WLUW Chicago Sound Alliance, broadcasting from the campus of Loyola University. It's live from the Heartland, featuring Katy Hogan, Michael James, and Thom Clark. Today's show's guests are Lori Lightfoot, a mayoral candidate, and the Better Governments Association, David Greising. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the show.
Hermanas y hermanos, welcome to another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. It is the 8th of December in the year 2018, and I'm here with Thom Clark and Katy Hogan. I'm Michael James. We're downtown at 26 East Pearson at WLUW's beautiful studios, and we have a wonderful show for you today. We're going to have Lori Lightfoot, who is a candidate for the mayor of the great city of Chicago, and we're going to have also David Greising, who is from the Better Government Association. So stay tuned for the next hour. A lot of good information, some good music, and you'll have a good time to encourage you to go out and do good in the world.
You know, Michael and Katy, I suspect our listeners out there in Rogers Park want to know about the news regarding the closing of your flagship Heartland Cafe at the end of the year. And I just want to say I think that the current owner provided a marvelous tribute for the community the two of you built over 37 years in Rogers Park, and that I'm hoping that what comes next will encompass the kind of spirit and community building that the two of you were able to do. But I'm sure our listeners would like to hear about, briefly, your own thoughts at this turn of events in a week with many other news things going on. Michael?
Well, I'm just digesting this news. I've lived a block from the Heartland since we sold it 6 years ago in June. I was really happy that the new owner kept the spirit of the community place going, that he encouraged to have local events. We had more politicians. We had some music. But apparently it's pretty hard to run a business. And while Katy and I had hoped it would be there forever with our little food discounts and just walk down the street to the beautiful Heartland Cafe, we're just going to have to remember the good times and the good things, whether it be Harold Washington, Obama, people from coming, working on people who were coming from El Salvador, Nicaragua. Heartland did a lot of things over a lot of years, and this radio show was broadcast from there, starting, I'm not sure of the year, but it's been close to 20 years ago.
It was over 20.
Katy, what are your thoughts? I know you called me last night. You were a little bit emotional, and we both said, well, we're going to have to digest this and figure out how we move forward, because there is a lot of work to do for all of us to make this world a better place.
You know,
Heartland
the first
played
time,
its
Katy,
part.
that you told me about the restaurant, I'm going, really? That's hard work. She goes, yes, but you don't know the pleasure in serving up a meal that people are enjoying along with the conversation and everything else. So I think that's part of what you folks were trying to create there. And I know this is hard, but any thoughts for our listeners as we move forward?
I'm heartbroken.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the way most of us feel about this. In a time where there's lots of need for uplifting as we continue on with the resistance here. So we'll find a way to continue doing this in Rogers Park, no doubt. We have a very exciting municipal election and all the other organizations and groups that we have. We will find that social place that we need to convene in going forward.
Okay, is that it?
You got anything to say besides being heartbroken?
No, we have a lot of news to cover. Let's just do it.
Okay, long remember the Heartland Cafe closing on the 31st of December. It's breaking our hearts, but there's a lot of struggles out there, and a lot of people face stronger adversarial conditions. So, as we like to say, do good in the world. The world needs all the good that you do. Onward.
So, there was a lot of news on the Washington front this week and what the guy in the White House is doing or what's about to happen to him. But to my mind, the biggest rumbling still for the midterm elections is this thing that the occupant of the White House kept complaining about, which were fake votes and vote fraud and all that. And lo and behold, what's happening, and particularly in North Carolina, is GOP vote fraud. And it's on a pretty big scale, to the extent where we might see a new election because there were votes stolen.
Yeah, somebody had to take back his concession. North Carolina has been one of the centerpieces of voter suppression since the GOP went into that business for seriousness in the last 10 years. And it's not really, it's not the same as voter fraud, what what Trump is claiming happens so much, and it doesn't happen very much at all. Certainly, since compared to what it was doing when we were young here in Chicago. No, it's keeping people from being able to vote, and they've perfected that, and really. At the same time, the vote protection people have perfected fighting it, and they've won a few battles. And then, some judge that was named by somebody who shall go nameless gets it in their courtroom and turns it around again. So this is going to be a protracted struggle.
And then when people do vote, legislators in both Michigan and Wisconsin strip the governor that won of many executive powers.
Yeah, this is an incredible.
This is how we build a republic, right? That represents the people.
Oh, you're so sarcastic, Tom.
He is that, isn't he? Where'd he learn that?
I don't know.
One of the things I remember in North Carolina, there was they divided a congressional district right down the middle of an African American school's campus, so that that you couldn't marshal the votes in one district for one candidate. They split the vote.
No,
well, not
when
that
exactly did that story happen, Michael?
It happened in the last year.
Okay, good. I never know. I have to find out which decade.
To bring it a little closer to home, because we're no saints here, our neighborhood of Englewood has 5 different wards representing that same neighborhood.
No kidding.
And so how can we have representative democracy when there's no one in charge except the bosses downtown, I guess, because the local power is all dispersed and broken up. So there are some major problems in the way that we write districts, in the impediments to actually voting, that I think strike to the core of our representative democracy that is under many, many different threats.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is, which we will always be banging on here. One of the things that I would really encourage people to look at is that the latest edition of the Indivisible papers. Indivisible goes on the offensive, I think, is what they call it. And there's something going around this week called "If you care about getting Trump out of office, here's what you need to do." Look it up, Indivisible, and you've got a printoutable. They're very good. They're very good. They were a major part of why we were so successful a few weeks ago. And the blue wave continues to grow. By the way, it's up to 40 Congress people
We're
this
hoping
week.
for that 41st in North Carolina.
This week we added to. I don't think that's a congressional seat. I think it's a legislative.
No.
It's a congressional.
Congressional seat.
It is
Congressional.
a congressional. Okay. Sorry. I'm glad. So 40, possibly 41 is what we're going up to. Okay. We also have this week the first charter school teachers strike at Acero, which is the former UNO. But those teachers were out there picketing in front of the old St. Scholastica's, and our buddies joined them on Thursday and Friday. A lot of energy was out there, and folks were wondering, how do we support anything related to a charter school, given that we don't support charter schools? And we got to the point that they have kids in those classrooms. That's who we support, and we support the teachers whose job it is to teach them. So shine on, and more forward power to you. The Blue Code of Silence trial rests. The remarkable trial. I guess we'll probably maybe ask our guest about that a little bit. I call it history making. That brave policemen and women got up and spoke the truth about what happened. I think it's the first in my life that ever happened. I could be corrected if somebody here has a memory of something else. Speaking of memories, we didn't mention it last week, but the Queen of All Angels school fire happened, the anniversary of that, and a lot of us have memories of that, especially those of us who went to Catholic schools and had nuns.
Well, I think you did mention that your dad had been at the fire afterwards.
I think you read my thing. We didn't do it on the radio, though.
Well, I'll tell you, your dad was the chief electrical inspector,
Yeah,
and he was
often-
pretty broken up by that
He
fire.
often got called to events like that in case they were electrically caused. He got called early in the course of the fire, stayed there the entire night, probably until the last fireman was gone. Came home, sat down at the kitchen table. Don't know exactly what transpired because I was in bed, but my mom left him there and found him there 4 hours later when she got up. He was pretty, whatever he saw, it was pretty awful.
After the show today in Rogers Park, up until noon, you can stop by Chalmers and learn more about our new medical marijuana dispensary. Many people don't know the one opened up quietly a few months ago, and there will be a public meeting to explain what that is all about. And I think, yes, Michael?
I just I noted in your notes, Thom, that we're gonna introduce our guest in a minute, Lori Lightfoot, who's running for mayor. But I noticed that Mendoza got the Dolores Huerta endorsement. That's so sad.
Well,
I just want to say that.
I'm not sure I feel...
Maybe Dolores Huerta has moved to the right?
Dolores Huerta is inconsequential in Chicago.
I know.
What was more important is that Tony Preckwinkle got the CTU endorsement, and that's boots on the ground. And we'll see how the other candidates that emerge through this challenge process also get boots in the ground, because it's going to be a very energetic few months that we have in front of us.
Hey, our friends at Mata Traders are doing their mistletoe and mata sale at 5112 North Ravenswood from noon to 5 p.m. today. So we got to do some of those, lightweight things, right? Because the other news is, the butterflies better get out of the way of the bulldozers.
Uh-oh.
Because
if the wall comes in...
To build Trump's wall, they will have to bulldoze the National Butterfly Center and make it pretty much a no man's land. Good work.
And the butterflies,
Donaldo. Good work.
The monarchs
Screw
are
those
already down
butterflies.
97% in California. 97.
No, this is like one of the main places. For
I know,
them.
but there's a lot of butterflies in California, and if they're down 97%, that's significant too. So we're talking about butterflies as a whole.
Building a better world for oil.
Oh, come on, let's go.
You've been listening to Live from the Heartland on WLUW 88.7 FM. Let's do a little musical interlude now.
What they're doing. Teach, Mavis, teach, with a little help from Michelle Obama. That's a nice song. Did she just make that up since Michelle made her statement, Thom?
No, this album's been out about 6 or 8 months.
Michelle was quoting her.
Yes, I know.
Right on.
We've been
right
accepting.
on.
I think they were quoting each other.
Yeah.
Because Michelle did that on the campaign trail some time ago.
No doubt it. Welcome. We have Lori Lightfoot here. And we have Michael hitting his head on the microphone and all kinds of other things you can hear. Lori, thanks for coming to Live from the Heartland this morning.
It's my pleasure.
Really, it's our pleasure to have you, too.
We got to know you as some of the early rumblings on police accountability coming off Laquan. And I know you were on the scene before then, but I think that's when the public first got to know you. Former prosecutor, you really took a look at what kind of police reforms might be needed in the early going to the consent decree. Why, moving from that kind of legal work, did you decide to take on this very different kind of role as running the whole city?
Well, in some ways, it was a pretty natural evolution. When the Laquan McDonald tape was released, we had this huge civic outcry that I think, frankly, changed the landscape, hopefully, forever.
Right.
We were then doing our work related to the Police Accountability Task Force, as we were kind of talking a little bit about offline. And we were doing that at a time when the violence in our city was really escalating out of control. This was back in late 15, early 16. And that caused me to really think about, well, what's going on here? Why are we seeing levels of violence that, frankly, we haven't seen in a city since the height of the crack epidemic in the mid-1990s? And what I found through basically talking to people, looking at statistics, and kind of being out in the streets is this. We have this enormous disparity of wealth, investment, and resources all across the city, but particularly in black and brown neighborhoods. It's astounding when I first heard these numbers of 25% unemployment routinely in a lot of neighborhoods. 40% of African American children living in poverty. Huge swaths of neighborhoods literally without any real resources other than a meager amount of government assistance that they were receiving. And the statistics go on, but what it tells you is a story of disinvestment. What it tells you is a story where people are growing up without any hope, and really the only economic development that's going on in a lot of these neighborhoods is illegal drug trade. And I knew that was fundamentally wrong. Look, I'm a kid who grew up in pretty tough circumstances. My father worked 2 and 3 jobs my whole growing up years. My mother worked a series of low-wage jobs in mental institutions, nursing homes, and then as a home health care aide. I've been very fortunate in my life coming from that. And really, I credit my parents with really pushing me and recognizing that there was an opportunity for me to have a different life beyond my present circumstances. I want kids all over the city to have that same set of values and support, that they know that there can be a better day if they take advantage of the opportunities. But when there are no opportunities, right, that's like the pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Well, wait, where are the boots, right? So I felt
And
like...
then could I have some shoelaces, please?
Yeah,
And I'll stop bothering you then.
Right.
Socks would be good.
So I felt like, given where I came from, given where I was, and frankly what I was witnessing, that it was absolutely essential for me to use my voice and platform to really be an advocate for people whose voices needed to be heard. I didn't think, and if you frankly had told me a year ago you're going to be running for mayor, I'd have told you you're crazy. But things just kept getting worse. And the silence from Rahm Emanuel and his administration, and frankly, people, and I won't name names, but people that I went to who had an absolutely bigger voice, bigger platform than me, were silent in the face of that, in part because they were either indifferent or frankly because they were afraid of Rahm. Mm-hmm. It ate at me. And so that's really kind of what started me on my path to think about, what can I do? I'm not a person who's afraid of taking on a tough challenge. I'm not a person who's afraid to jump into something without a guarantee of success. What's most important for me is that we not be silent in the face of so much heartache.
How tricky was it for you after running your campaign for maybe 6 months or more? You could tell me exact figure when Rahm announced he wasn't running.
Well, we had this moment of euphoria, of course, right? High fives all around. And ultimately, I think him not being on the ballot is a very good thing for our city. And frankly, I take credit, as I'm sure others do, for punching him and holding him accountable and frankly calling BS over a range of things that, frankly, that legacy we're still going to live with, even though he's not on the ballot and he's not going to be the mayor.
Oh, sure. We're celebrating 10 years of the crummiest parking meter deal ever made.
Yeah.
With 65 years left.
So Daley and Ron.
Right.
Yeah.
But what happened after that, right? All these people, frankly, some of whom were folks that I went to and said, would you stand up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And said,
Yeah.
They all jump in now, right? Goliath is slayed, and magically they have political courage. So what it says to me is either they thought things were just fine before, and I don't know anybody in this city who has a consciousness, and certainly not somebody who professes to be a progressive with social justice and equity and inclusion as part of who they are as people, who thought everything was just fine. So either they thought it was just fine, or they lacked the political courage to stand up and fight.
Could you give us a quick update on the status of the consent decree negotiations?
Sure. The draft consent decree was filed in federal court before Judge Robert Dow, one of my former colleagues and partners. I've known Bob for a long time. He held a series of public hearings where people could come in and kind of testify. That was in late October. And so right now it sits. It's with him. The draft is there. People offered comments. I offered detailed evaluation of the consent decree. I think the concept of it is absolutely essential and necessary. I think there are a number of things that need to be fixed. And again, go on my website, lightfootforchicago.com. I did a 6-page, single-page critique. And frankly, I was talking to the judge because I hope he will make some necessary changes. But it sits with him right now. And frankly, I ran into somebody recently from the ACLU and said, so where do things sit? It's kind of radio silence right now. He has not given a deadline on when he will come back. I can't imagine he's not going to have some questions for the lawyers who were involved. At this point, we're in early December. It wouldn't surprise me if we didn't get a final consent decree until probably sometime early next year. The other piece that's moving forward as well is the monitor. There was an RFP that went out in, I think, late August, early September. Teams of people applied. They came in probably now about a month ago for questioning from the city and from the Attorney General's office. They went and met with the community, a lot of public hearings. So we're waiting to hear about the selection of the monitor as well. Now, it may not come until the court rules on the consent decree content itself, but I look for that to be in place by early next year.
And quickly, because it's related, as a former prosecutor, are you intrigued with the judge taking so long to make her decision in the trial of the 3 police officers? She's going to wait 2 weeks or more?
I think she's probably going to issue a written opinion, would be my guess. Look, if you look at the track record, bench trials make me a little nervous.
Mm-hmm. That's why I'm asking. I'm intrigued what's going on here behind the scenes.
And frankly, what I understand is she was a trial partner of one of the defense attorneys, which she did not disclose to the parties.
Whoops.
I don't know how they found that out, but that was an issue on the very first day of the trial, which didn't get a lot of press. So it makes the track record, it makes me nervous.
Yes.
And this is a tricky case, right? The defense, I think, did everything they could to describe this as, just paperwork errors. But I think what the big takeaway from this case is the systemic problem that kicked in right away and compelled officers to tailor their police reports to fit the narrative that they wanted, whether or not that was consistent with reality or not. And I'll say this, it's part of the task force work. One of the first things that we did was recommend a policy for the release of videos, audios, and initial police reports. We had a big back and forth with the city about those initial police reports.
Right.
And my position was, and luckily we prevailed, is, look, if officers know that those early police reports and police-involved shootings and other serious actions are going to see the light of day sooner rather than later, hopefully that incentivizes them to tell the truth.
Yeah.
So it's critically important that we have a lot of transparency. Video, audio, and those initial police reports are critical.
So you just mentioned, you used a phrase, stuff that doesn't get press.
Mm-hmm.
You've been in the bureaucracy in one form or another for enough years to know there's a lot of things that don't get press.
That's right.
And what if you were to name a couple things going into, say you were elected mayor,
Mm-hmm.
what are the 2 or 3 issue items, front burner issue items that you believe the public doesn't hear the full story on, and if they did, it would change so much of the conversation about that issue?
Well, where to start, right?
I was hoping you'd say
Look,
that.
I'll talk about an issue that's been in the news of late, the workers' compensation system.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Daley and then Rahm cut a deal to allow Ed Burke to have exclusive dominion over the workers' compensation system. There's no budget, meaning there's no limit on the amount of money that can be spent, and by all accounts, it's $100 million a year. Now, look,
incredible.
we don't want to deprive people who have a rightful working compensation claim, but you know this as well as I do. There's been expose after expose of people who are abusing the system. You can't have a system that has no checks and balances, where there's no transparency whatsoever, and shamefully, frankly, Rahm Emanuel and the Corporation Council allowed Ed Burke to hire Jenner and Block, one of the most expensive law firms in the city. And I have a lot of friends at Jenner, great firm, a lot of respect for them, but they're not cheap. Hire Jenner and Block to basically be his blocking guards against the Inspector General, who's just trying to get a little insight into what's going on with that $100 million a year.
And that wasn't even, I understand, the cause of the invasion of his offices by the FBI.
That's the word on the street. It's something different. It's not that. It's not Trump. It's not Mueller. It's something else. I think we'll find out probably in due time. It might be the same old thing that's netted prosecutions of 40-plus aldermen over recent years.
The other thing that you did allude to is the truth of us being the tale of two cities at this point. And in our neighborhood, one of the ways that we have fought against both over-gentrification and over-lilification, if you will, is making sure affordable housing exists. Currently we have a pretty terrible record on that now.
Yes, it's abysmal. We're in a crisis.
We're in a crisis. Talk about that, would you?
We are in a crisis. By a conservative estimate is that we're down about 120,000 units. 120,000 units. And you multiply by that out and think about the number of families who are being crushed by rising property taxes, an absolutely regressive property tax system that was rigged in favor of big commercial interests at the expense of low-income folks. And, we haven't talked about it, but we need to talk about Tony Preckwinkle protecting Joe Barrios, who's the architect of that system. I think we have to do two things. First of all, I think I'm still the only mayoral candidate who's issued a comprehensive housing plan, and again, that's on the website. What we heard from people, and we looked at this issue from every conceivable angle, and also, of course, looking at what can we do to be better people for folks that are homeless and on the street and having housing instability. We heard this: the city bureaucracy crushes opportunities for us to try to solve these problems in a significant way. We don't have a city policy right now, which will change under my leadership, that understands the crisis, is willing to cut through the bureaucracy, get involved in deals on the front end so we can move forward and build more affordable housing units. That's an issue that has to change. Number two is this notion of automatic privilege and automatic prerogative. It's got to go. It's got to go. It is a source of corruption, right? Because if you know that you can't, frankly, buy a cup of water in a ward without kissing the ring of the alderman, what are you going to do if you're a business person, if you're a developer? You're either going to say, no, thank you, right? I'll take my business elsewhere, or you're going to play the game.
Right.
And that's a problem. And when we have a citywide crisis, as we do, on housing that's affordable to keep individuals and family in the city and not turn us into San Francisco or Seattle or some other place like that, you can't have control separated up into 50 different fiefdoms. This is a thing where the city government and a mayor has to lead, and we've got to put aldermanic prerogative and privilege to the side so we can solve these problems and give people an opportunity to stay in the city.
Lori, I'd like to ask a question about the race itself.
Sure.
There are a lot of candidates in the race. A number of people are having their petitions challenged. You obviously are watching this very closely. What's your sense of who will be the top finishers and what will be the status of the challenges to a number of these folks?
Look, I think, and I'm one of the ones who's been challenged. Tony Preckwinkle's challenged my petitions. And frankly, if this was a lawsuit, not only would I be filing a motion to dismiss, I'd be filing a motion to sanction the lawyers for bringing such a frivolous claim. I mean, they've done things like, for example, said, oh, all your signatures on page 9,999 are bogus. Well, guess what, folks? We only submitted 3,400 pieces of paper. So this 9,000 figure, it's just made up out of whole cloth. They've challenged the signature of our lawyer, great guy, who just so happened to be Barack Obama's election lawyer, saying his signature was bogus. So it's stuff like that that goes on and on. We're going to be fine. We did our work. We made sure that we were getting real signatures and validating real time. But the point of this is it's a game. It's a relic of the old machine. It's intended to crush people who may not have the resources to be able to put together a petition fight. It's hard enough to get the signatures out there because you got to get 2 or 3 times, and particularly on a citywide election, you got to have in the 30s to even be within spitting distance of validity.
In the 30,000.
30,000s, right?
Yeah, that's crazy.
So it is a game that is intended to perpetuate the machine. I'm told that Tony Preckwinkle had 200 people working 3 shifts in a week's time to come up with the challenges against, who? Me, Susanna Mendoza, and Dorothy Brown, 3 women of color. So what does that tell you? But look,
it tells us that we've got a lot of women of color running.
It does, which is a good
leading.
thing.
The first 4 positions, and you didn't mention her, but Amara Enya gets a lot of play in our neighborhood, and you and Mendoza and Tony are the top. No one mentions any of the men at all,
we don't
white,
hear
black,
these
or
guys.
anything.
We don't hear about them.
Seriously.
Well, there are certain wards where those other guys will make a little showing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Look, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I want to talk money a little bit because
Sure.
you've raised the disparities very well, and I think one of the biggest challenges for the next mayor is closing that gap. The major tool that's been used are TIFs, which have probably contributed to the disparity. How do you tackle reforming systems like TIFs, as well as coping with the challenges of the how far we've fallen behind in pension payments. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just looming in the
huge issue.
background.
Look, I think you got to start with actually having a consciousness about the necessity of investing in neighborhoods. And that sounds like a simple thing, but it really isn't. I mean, if you look at the investment strategy of Rahm Emanuel over the last 7 years, or frankly go back further, it is about feeding the few and not the many. And fundamentally, we have to change that mindset and show up in very different ways. Look, there's a lot of money in the city budget that frankly is going to different priorities. It's not going to solve our pension problem, don't get me wrong. There's no magic solution there. I've talked to everybody in their brother about that issue, but we can't talk about new revenue. And what I would talk about is progressive sources of revenue until we can demonstrate to the taxpayers of the city that we're going to be good fiduciaries of their hard-earned dollars. I can't come to you and say, empty your pockets, I need some more, unless I am taking seriously the notion of making city government more accountable and making it more efficiently. You know, one of the things I talk about all the time, of course, is the amount of money that we have spent, really squandered, on police settlements, judgments, and attorney's fees over the last 7 years. We're at $500 million and counting.
It's incredible.
And there's no sense of urgency around it, in part because the city lacks a risk management system.
Okay, Lori Lightfoot, we could talk to you for the entire hour, which we knew, but we have this second guest sitting in there, smiling big, listening to you talk.
Hello, Dave.
And he wrote a great article about you just this morning. Will you come back?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's been a great conversation.
Will you come up to the 49th Ward when we invite you?
I'm telling you, invite me. I'll be
All
there.
right, all right.
We're inviting you now. We'll have to work out the details in the next day or so.
No, absolutely. I'd love
Thank
to.
you, Lori Lightfoot,
You impressed me
candidate
the
for
first
mayor.
time I heard you running for mayor, and you impressed me today.
Yeah,
Thank
you were good.
Thank you.
Right on,
strong.
sister.
All right.
You're listening to Live
great
from the
weekend.
Heartland on WLUW 88.7 FM. Stay tuned.
And we are back. That was Lori Lightfoot, a candidate for mayor. We'll try and get some more, but wasn't she impressive?
Yes, she was.
We are now with David Greising,
Greising, yes,
I'm
the
sorry.
German pronunciation.
I know, I'm
yes.
sorry, David. David is the brand new exec director of Better Government Association. Is that
Right.
correct?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming in.
So glad to be here. You know, I've taken over from Andy Shaw, who I'm sure was a frequent guest and longtime CEO of the Better Government Association. So they're big shoes to fill.
Only once, I think.
Oh,
But,
really?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So you're a big fish.
And we have lots of things to talk about, but I think what prompted my originally contacting you before we both had trips late summer and fall was the recycling study. Because this is something that, particularly in Rogers Park, we have been very good about and very frustrated about, particularly the last 8 to 12 years. We had a really good recycling program that was done by a private nonprofit and very efficient, and for years until the city kind of took over and tried to do things. What did you discover looking at how the city of Chicago does recycling?
Well, the city of Chicago has the worst recycling rate among the major cities in the U.S. Yeah, and that's not because people aren't willing to recycle. As you pointed out, Thom, people are willing to recycle. The problem has been kind of corruption and failures in the way the system is designed. We had the blue bag recycling program, which it was discovered, this is years ago, that those blue bags ended up just going into the landfill, just going to the dump. So people went through all the trouble just to find out that their recycled waste was going to the dump. What our investigation found is that there's a conflict of interest built into the system. Basically, the city has done this test where there are 3 areas of the city, one run by the city itself, and the other 2 run by 2 private contractors. Waste management has about a third of the city. Waste management of those 3 units is the only one that also owns a landfill. So they make money, just they're paid by the city to do the recycling work. But if they put a sticker on that blue bin and say this recycling is not done properly, there's a pizza crust in here, or there's a plastic bag in here, this has to go to the dump, guess whose dump it goes to? It goes to Waste Management's dump. And so, and others as well, not just only Waste Management, but Waste Management stands to benefit when it contaminates recycled waste and says it's not good enough for us. And what we found is that even though Waste Management picks up recycling in only 1/3 of the city, they account for 90% of the contaminated waste. they have contaminated over the last 5 years enough blue bins to fill Wrigley Field and overflow Wrigley Field with those blue bins of recycled waste.
Well,
so
least not the White Sox park.
maybe Soldier Field, who knows? That looks like kind of a waste
Come on,
receptacle in a way.
We got a good team this year.
Right.
Let's not make them play in the garbage.
Right. So this is just a conflict of interest that's built into the system because they get paid twice. And our investigation has shown that this is a problem. It contributes to the cynicism that leads people to not recycle, which then creates problems because we have too much waste going into the landfills. So it's an invirtuous cycle of kind of failure on the part of the city.
Big time.
You've been following, like many of us, the what I call the code of silence trial with the 3 officers, and I just like your reaction now that the trial is ended, but we're waiting for a verdict. What did you see in the course of that particular court theater?
Well, you saw you saw a manifestation of the way that the police force circles ranks around fellow officers, almost no matter what happens out on the streets.
That's right.
Jason Van Dyke's murder of Laquan McDonald, which was caught on videotape, showed us what happens. There, the evidence was before our very eyes, and the 3 officers who were tried this week and prior. The evidence seems to show that they were complicit in a conspiracy to kind of bury and make this problem go away. We had one brave officer stand up and testify that she was there. She saw that there were 2 officers, I guess, altogether. They broke from the herd.
That's right. Very brave.
Yeah. What's interesting though is that there are more senior officers who have not been brought to trial or charged that also, some of the testimony indicates, are complicit in supporting this system. I sat in on the hearings for the consent decree. Lori Lightfoot was talking about the consent decree earlier. And the problems that came up in that in that process, that 2-day hearing, where you saw the kind of split between the community and the police force kind of show up in bright detail. Community people talking about being harassed on the streets by cops because they were African American, or the kind of gross inattention to the needs of disabled people and the way that they are picked on by cops sometimes. And then you had the cops stand up and kind of talk about how dangerous it is on the streets. There's a legitimate problem for police. I sympathize with them. But what came out in this trial and what came out in that testimony is, first of all, there's bias against certain people that are being policed, and that there's a system that of old style policing that is not protecting the rights of the individual. And we saw that brutally in that 16 shots that went into Laquan McDonald, and then the concerted effort on the part of his colleagues on the police force to protect Jason Van Dyke.
So you guys received an award for a 4-part series on police shootings, did you not?
Yes, that's correct.
And that was, did you work on that, or was before you were director?
That was before I came to the BJA. I came to the BJA in March. The series focused on police shootings in the suburbs. Our investigators looked at what happened in the McDonald case and decided to say, well,
Where
is this
else?
only in Chicago,
Right.
or might it be in the Cook County suburbs?
I think they might have started with a thing of saying, I hear this happens a lot in Dalton.
Dalton, yeah, and we also just published a
Harvey.
lengthy story about Dalton, which touched on a number of different issues.
Yeah.
But as regards that series, we found that of 113 police shootings in the Cook County suburbs, none of them led to any disciplinary action whatsoever. There were cases where cops were shooting into houses, into crowds of people, where innocent bystanders were being shot accidentally by these police, and yet there were either, in some cases, no investigation of those shootings, or they were investigated and the cop was cleared for what, by any reasonable judgment, might be considered a bad shoot. As a result of this, Kwame Raoul introduced some legislation that now requires there to be an investigation if whenever a police there's an officer involved shooting.
Besides running the BGA, you've returned to doing some writing for the Tribune, and your weekend column is looking at something that Lori brought up, and you actually point Lori out as someone who's actually speaking to our regressive system of taxation and how it contributes to this tale of two cities.
Right.
Share with our listeners a little bit more of what you explore there.
Right, and I'm writing for the Tribune a couple times a month. This column was actually written for Crane Chicago
right.
Business.
I'm
sorry. Thanks for reading the columns. I really appreciate it. It's fun to be writing a column again. I wrote
bet.
one for the Tribune for many years, and it's an enjoyable part of my new job. What I brought up in this column was the fact that unlike the governor campaign, where basically no issues were discussed at any level of depth whatsoever,
Boy, I'll say.
right, in the mayoral campaign, we're actually seeing some of these candidates take on some interesting issues. We've seen Bill Daley say, for example, that he can rebuild the population of the city back to 3 million people.
So you've seen Bill Daley say
Yes.
that. Where is Bill Daley? And where has he been?
Come home, Bill Daly.
Yeah,
Won't
well,
you
he's
come
not
home?
hanging
Why don't
out.
you
There was
stay
a
home?
news clip of him last night. He was somewhere in Chicago.
I just interviewed him yesterday. I went over to their campaign offices out on the near west side, and he is getting out in the neighborhoods. We're not seeing him much, and in fact, I told him I'd like to trail him for a day or so just to see how he does, because he's very used to hanging out in boardrooms and with wealthy people and with political insiders, and I don't know how he'll do kind of out in the neighborhoods, but he claims it's going well, and I said, well, I'd really love to tag along and check that out sometime.
You should have probably watched his signature collector on Morse Avenue. I never
No
saw
kidding.
somebody get so many no's in a row. No
Interesting,
thanks.
interesting,
No thanks.
interesting. Well, he's doing really well on raising money, and it's
Evidently.
and Lori Lightfoot, who does do really well in the neighborhoods. She's not doing quite as well on money, and of course, her signatures are being challenged by Tony Preckwinkle.
That's sad to hear.
Yeah, it is. I mean, Lori was right. I mean, that is old style Chicago politics.
BS.
That's kind of the Preckwinkle Barrios approach to running this city, and the less of that we have, the better. But as regards, Tom, you were asking about the taxes. Lori Lightfoot brought up in one of the mayoral debates the fact that the way taxation happens in the city of Chicago, the heavy reliance on sales tax and fees hits poor people hardest.
Yep.
There's a study out by the government of Washington, D.C. that compares tax rates in various cities and according to income level. And a family of three with a family income, 2 parents and a child, with a family income of $25,000, for example, is taxed at a higher rate than all but four. The impact of taxes on them is worse than in all but 4 cities in the United States. A family,
Shame.
a family of 3 with $150,000 in income, at the other end of the spectrum, they do better than about 18 than people in 18 cities in the country. And so that shows you the huge variation in the way people are affected by taxes. The reliance, 10.25% is your total tax burden. If you're earning $25,000 and you've got 3 people to feed, you're spending just about every dollar that you earn in order to pay your bills buying taxable stuff. If you're earning $150,000, part of your money goes towards the taxable stuff you have to buy, but other purchases go toward untaxed items, as well as you're able to put away a little bit of money to save for your child's college education, for example. So the over-reliance on sales tax in this city is a serious problem. Now, she did not mention that, for example, income taxes can help alleviate that. There's no income tax in the city of Chicago. New York City charges an income tax. I'm not saying that an income tax would be a good idea necessarily, but different options ought to be looked at. And what I was saying with regard to Lori Lightfoot and other candidates is, tell us your revenue strategy. They're all talking about various cost issues, which they should be talking about, but we're hearing nothing about revenue strategies. We know from Bill Daley, for example, he said that he doesn't plan to raise property taxes, at least in the first year. That's very similar to Rahm Emanuel, who raised property taxes only twice during the course of his campaign. He raised sales taxes 6 out of his 8 years in office. We'd like to hear what the revenue plans are by these candidates, because that's really a pocketbook issue for people who are voting.
Yeah, Lori Lightfoot on the earlier segment of the show did mention progressive sources of revenue, but I didn't get a chance to ask her that. What would be a progressive source of revenue?
Well, some people think that an income tax would be a more progressive source of revenue because it's based on income as opposed to just what you purchase.
Just free floating fees on your heads, Chicago.
Exactly, and to look at the fee structure, because sales taxes is part of what we pay, but fees for various goods and various services are another factor. And to look at how those fees are allocated in a way that it kind of disposed toward charging for, say, purchases that we make, for example, health club memberships, different things that are discretionary purchases, to weight heavily toward more discretionary purchases, dog grooming, for example, things like that, as opposed to things that people have no choice but to purchase.
You note that last month the BGA published this 4-part series that looked at how the rate of poverty is actually grown in the suburbs, surpassing the city,
right?
Which I think was a big surprise, but it also got lost in other news. But I find it curious that the Better Government Association, the Metropolitan Planning Council, has done a lot of work in recent year or so on the costs of segregation. You even have the Regional Planning Association looking at these disparities as something holding back growth or affecting how they plan for the future. Why do you think these kind of mega behind-the-scenes planning groups or research groups like BGA, to my mind, are suddenly paying attention to this endemic problem we've had for several generations of the growing disparity, the tale of two cities?
I think because the problem has increased as we've seen the downtown development really be as strong as it's been. It's one of those cases of, in a way, an unintended consequence of a certain measure of success in the downtown areas. When you see a downtown experiencing the kind of building boom that Chicago is seeing, and you see something like this Lincoln Yards project being proposed, a $5 billion mega project that's going to create thousands of new units of housing, while at the same time you're seeing people pushed out of their neighborhoods because they can't afford to live in the old family home that it's been in the house, been in the family for a couple generations, where you see certain neighborhoods like Little Village suffering the consequences of environmental discrimination. You're seeing some of the when you look at the depopulation of the city of Chicago, and you're seeing where some of these people who are leaving the city are moving. We've lost, as you know, a lot of African-American residents of the city of Chicago. And one of the things we looked at in this lengthy story on Dalton was where have the people who've left Chicago gone, and what is their life like now? And what we were trying to show in this story on Dalton is how poverty is now being exported into suburbs. People think of suburbs as kind of rich, broad lawns, right, narrow minds kind of thing. This is, the suburbs are not necessarily the promised land for people who leave the city. And what we wanted to show is that some of the problems that we kind of associate with poorer neighborhoods in Chicago have been exported across the city boundaries.
Yeah, a lot of Chicagoans got to know the suburbs by virtue of canvassing for Sean Caston and Ms. Underwood. And,
right,
and actually, it was quite an education, because you can go down streets in Barrington that are what you would expect, and you can also go down streets in Barrington that are very different from that.
Yeah.
Little houses all next to each other. For an outfit like Better Government Association, what is the most important part of your mission as you do this job?
Well, we have a kind of a 3-part mission: transparency, efficiency, and accountability in government. We fight first and foremost for the public's access to the records of our government.
Right to know.
Yeah, we think that we need to enforce vigorously the right to know.
And we thank you.
Well, it's such important work, and it's really, the difference for me in this job, as opposed to when I've had other jobs in journalism, writing columns and such, throwing slings and arrows at people for various things, is that in this job you actually can get things done. And as an example, we have an investigative journalism unit that uses up most of our resources, and that's where we devote most of our effort. But we also have a few people who do policy work, really mainly fighting for open records, transparency in government. Madeline Dubeck, who's the leader of our policy team, noticed a bill there was an effort to slip a bill through the legislature last spring that would have prevented release of any records of a criminal investigation while the investigation was open. Had that been passed, and before the Laquan McDonald tape came out, the Laquan McDonald tape never would have seen the light of day. And so Madeline saw this happen and kind of put two and two together. Nobody else had noticed it. She rallied some other good government groups around the idea of we've got to put a stop to this. Within a day, the bill had been killed. It was dead. And so we prevented a kind of sneaky effort to protect, police who shoot people out on the streets. Videos like that never would have been released. And so that work for open records is one of the most important things that we do. We go to court frequently in order to obtain access to open records. Elon Musk wants to build this super high-speed train from downtown to O'Hare.
And Ron wants to ride it with him.
Ron wants to ride it with him. Ron believes, despite his years in office, that Elon Musk's claim that taxpayers aren't going to have to pay a penny for this, that there are no environmental problems, all kinds of magic things are going to happen.
Where do they stick their heads in some bucket of goofiness? I mean, when do they do that?
I guess maybe right after the inauguration, there's some sort of secret ceremony or something. I don't know. But in any event, we have gone after the city and requested all the records with regard to the Musk bid and the other bid. The city is declining to hand over those records, we think in violation of the Freedom of Information laws, because they've announced a winner of the contest, of the bid, and once you announce a winner, you're supposed to release the bid documents. They're not releasing them. We've now sued to prevent them from moving forward with the contract until they release the records, where we've asked a judge to stay any progress. So that's the kind of stuff we do kind of behind the scenes.
What a radical group.
So those three words again were transparency,
efficiency, and accountability in government. So efficiency, when money's being wasted, we try to pay attention and call that out in public so that people are aware of how their money is being wasted. And accountability is, just basically holding office holders accountable. One of our big initiatives on the policy side is we've fought for years against gerrymandering for a fair electoral map in Illinois. That's a very difficult fight. As you know, there was a court ruling that basically said that any new maps effort needs to go through Mike Madigan and the legislature. And, of course, Mike Madigan likes the maps the way they've been drawn. He's drawn them.
It's always fun to talk to elected officials about trying to go for a fair map. All of a sudden, they run the other way.
They really do. And so we've decided we're going to stay in that fight. The next 3 years are really important. The new census is in 2020. The new maps will be drawn after that, sometime before 2023. We're going to stay in the fight at least that long. And I was in a meeting in the last couple of weeks where we were talking about it, and one of the people we were talking to said, you know what, we're in the fight through 2023, we're in the fight through 2033. Illinois needs a map because this map protects a system that protects incumbents and puts people in office almost for life. We have more districts in the state of Illinois go without any opposition than in any other state in the country.
Is that true?
That's right. And so, that shows you just how much these incumbents, really almost with regard to party in some ways, it's really an incumbency thing, not a Democrat or Republican issue. It's just once you get elected, you're in the club, you get to stay. That's the point of the gerrymandered maps.
This past week, David, many of us received a solicitation from Tracy Bain, the new publisher of the Chicago Reader, formerly publisher of Windy City Times, and she's trying to fundraise for the Reader to keep it alive, keep independent alternative journalism going. I'm not sure even if she wrote that she would understand exactly what alternative means today, though she certainly has been a media maven around it. You've been through lots of shifts in the media landscape,
Right.
personally and professionally. Where are things going? I mean, are we going to have to rely on BGAs to come up with investigative reports as newspapers shrink and shrink?
Well, I look at it, Tom, in a way from an optimistic side, which is that there's a lot of great stuff going on in not-for-profit journalism right now. When you see groups like City Bureau and Block Club Chicago and others that are starting up in Justice Watch, focused on criminal justice issues, there's a lot of really interesting stuff, and we're filling gaps that are being left by the commercial press that is being hollowed out. The Sun-Times, is, given the resources they have, does an amazing job, but that newsroom is way down from what it once was when I started there back in the early 80s. The Tribune is right now, we're waiting to hear who the new buyer of the Chicago Tribune will be. They just had another round of buyouts of serious journalists. That's the thing. The people who now leave, just one of the reporters that left, Chris Walker, a kind of world-class photojournalist, walked out of the Chicago Tribune this week as a result of a buyout. You've seen, about half of the Tribune editorial board walked out. Now, given what I surmise are your political leanings, perhaps you think that's a good thing, given how conservative that editorial board has been, but still.
No, we need more papers.
Right, David, we're going to have you back on and talk more.
Nice
this has
start
been
of a
great.
conversation, Dave.
You've been listening to Live from the Heartland, brought to you every Saturday morning on WLUW 88.7 Chicago Sound Alliance. We want to thank everybody who makes this show possible: Katy Hogan, Thom Clark, Lynn Orman, myself, Michael James, and Jake Levy, who has a wonderful show on Thursday afternoon called Hardly Strictly Jazz, 12 to 2 on WLUW. We want you all to do good in the world because the world needs all the good that you do, and we'll be back next week. We're going to have Daniel Biss talking reform for Illinois. So it's going to be a big week. You can make a difference. All power to the people.